la kiap suchi. Chodang changchu senpai so liang de shin kiap suchi. Jita gong ge ge sheki. Changchu tukti ke padang. Changchu senpe la pala. De da rim shin ne pata. De sin ro la pendon du. Changchu sen ni ke gi sin. De sin du ni la pala. Rim pa sin du la pa yi. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la. Changchu bardu dagi kyap suchi. Dagi jinso ki pe sonam ki. Drola penchu sangye druparsho. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness which is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. Manam kadang yampe semchen tamche dewa dang dewe gyudang genpa gyuche. Duknyao dang duknyao gi gyudang rawa gyuche. Duknyao me pe dewa dang mi rawa gyuche. Chakang ni dang rawe ton yom la me pa gyuche. Refuge of all sentient beings without exception, divine subjugator of terrifying Maras, together with the hosts of demons, the one who understands all realities without exception exactly as they are, transcendent conqueror, together with your disciples, please come here to this place. Vajra Samadza, Vajra Samadza, Vajra Samadza. Malu Senchen Kunji Gongyur Jin, Tude Punje Mize Chonsela. No na malu jishin yen gyurpe. Trom den porche ne dear shek su so. Argam padyam pushpe dupe. Aloke gande nevite. Shabda Pratitsa Soham. The ground is sprinkled with scented water and strewn with flowers. It is adorned with Meru, the supreme mountain, the four continents, and the sun and moon. As a Buddha field I offer it. May all sentient beings attain the happiness of the Buddha fields. Whatever merit I've gathered through prostrations, offerings, confession, rejoicing, beseeching, and praying, for the sake of the enlightenment of all sentient beings, all this I dedicate. Sashi Pushu Shukshin Meito Chang Rirab Ling Si Nige Genpadi Sangye Sing La Mikte Povagi Drokun Namda Chindu Choparsho Chaksel Wadang Choching Shakpadang Jesu Yerong Kushing Sowayi Gewa Chunse Dagi Chisakpa Tam Che Sope Chang Chu Chino. Okay, then skip to page 11. Namo to the Lama of utterly pure appearance and existence. I offer the fundamental ground of appearance and existence. I supplicate you to thoroughly liberate the three realms. Please grant your blessings and overturn the depths of samsara. Sublime Master, wish-fulfilling jewel, crown ornament, the inconceivable, inexpressible mind of the victorious ones, the one endowed with the five wisdoms of omniscience, gracious one, the embodiment of love, precious protector of beings, I supplicate you from within the essence of mind. Please grant your blessings from within the innate nature. Please bless me that I may realize the Dharmakaya that is beyond intellect, this primordially unborn, completely pure mind. Transcending conqueror, the one thus gone, foe destroyer of afflictive emotions, completely perfected Buddha, endowed with logic and virtue, the one gone to bliss, knower of the world, captain, tamer of beings, the unexcelled teacher of gods and men, I respectfully prostrate, completely touching my head to the stainless feet of the unequaled Shakya king. At the time of your birth, leader of two-legged beings, taking 7 steps on this great earth you proclaimed, I am supreme in this world. To you who were wise even then, I prostrate. Possessing a body of complete purity, your sublime form is excellent. An ocean of primordial wisdom, you are like a golden mountain, the one whose renown is evident throughout the 3 worlds, protector of supreme attainment. To you I prostrate. To you who are endowed with the supreme marks, whose face is like an immaculate moon, to you, the one with a complexion like gold, I prostrate. A flawless one such as you among the 3 levels of existence is most exquisite. Unparalleled, omniscient one, to you I prostrate. Supreme among humans, captain of those to be tamed, the one thus gone who severs the all-binding fetters, who with senses pacified is utterly pacified and skilled in peace. To that one, the one who dwelled at Shravasti, I prostrate. Refuge endowed with great compassion, totally omniscient one who indicates the way, ground basis for oceans of merit and qualities, I prostrate to the one thus gone. The pure cause free from attachments, the virtue that liberates from the lower realms, the altogether supreme ultimate truth, to the pacifying Dharma I prostrate. Having been liberated, they also reveal the path to liberation. Thoroughly respectful of the 3 higher trainings, they are a field of sublime qualities. To the Sangha I also prostrate. And then we'll move to page 15. I prostrate to the youthful Manjusri, to those in the worlds of the 10 directions, however many there are, all the lions among humans who appear during the 3 times, To all of them, without exception, I pay homage with respectful body, speech, and mind. The force of my aspiration prayer for excellent conduct brings all the victorious ones directly to mind. Bowing down with bodies as numerous as atoms in the realms, I prostrate to all the victorious ones. In a single atom, there are Buddhas as numerous as atoms, each residing in the midst of their sons and daughters. Like that, I imagine the whole Dharmakatu completely filled with victorious ones. To those with oceans of inexhaustible, praiseworthy qualities, with sounds containing oceans of tones of melodic speech, I express the qualities of all the victorious ones. I praise all the Sudatas, with the finest flowers, the finest garlands, music, ointments, supreme parasols, supreme lamps, and the finest incense. I make offerings to the victorious ones. With the finest cloth, supreme scents, and fine powders equal to Mount Meru, all displayed in supreme and magnificent ways, I make offerings to those victorious ones. With vast and unsurpassable offerings, I venerate all the victorious ones. Through the power of faith and excellent conduct, I prostrate and offer to the victorious ones. Whatever negative actions I have performed with body, speech, and also mind, overpowered by desire, aggression, and stupidity, I confess each and every one of them. I rejoice in everyone's merit, the victorious ones of the 10 directions, the Bodhisattvas, the Pratyeka Buddhas, those in training, those beyond training, and all beings. I request the protectors, the lamps of the worlds of the 10 directions, who passing through the stages of awakening, attain Buddhahood beyond attachment, to turn the unsurpassable Dharma wheel. I supplicate with my palms joined together those who intend to demonstrate nirvana, to remain for kalpas as numerous as atoms in the realms, for the welfare and happiness of all beings. I dedicate whatever slight virtue is accumulated through prostrating, offering, confessing, rejoicing, requesting, and supplicating to enlightenment.
Hey, thank you so much for coming, everyone. Right? Is that? Yeah. So this session, without the lamas here, we'll do something similar to what we did last weekend when it was just Nathan and I. And that is involving review, on the faults of defects of samsara. So the last session, when it was just the two of us, we went over the very first section, which was contemplating past and future lives, really kind of coming to a place of really deeply thinking about, where we are in terms of our feeling of really relating to and believing in past and future lives, or maybe not so much, right? So then today I printed out and sent for you all the 3 characteristics, or the 3 types of suffering that characterize samsara. So maybe what we can focus on is actually just the first section here. But before, and we can read over that, and then I also have a prompt for you all to reflect on, and then we can have some discussion. But based on the really wonderful teachings that we received from Khenpo Rinpoche last weekend, I'm curious to know if anybody went out and purchased or ordered, or if you already have spent some time reading the 2 texts that he encouraged us to read. So that those are Gampopa's Ornament of Precious Liberation and the Words of My Perfect Teacher. So I just wanted to open it up for anyone to share if if anyone did spend some time after those teachings with him reading, and if there's anything you wanted to share about that. okay, maybe not. Well, then would like to encourage you again, really to spend some time in your free time, because it's just going to be so supportive to this course, to read the material there. And I think a lot of you probably already have, anyway, but if you haven't, it's definitely worth spending some time with. And, we do have someone, Paula.
I was reading the words of my perfect teacher, and Pacha Rinpoche is really rough.
Yeah.
Basically, he was going through the hell realms and all that, and it's almost as if any thought that you have is, really, it was kind of depressing and scary, because I don't think there's anybody who hasn't had some of the thoughts. And I've always found the words of my perfect teacher being kind of rough to read, not as rough, but less rough than Jewel Ornament.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. I can relate for sure. I remember being really, really kind of, in my early days reading that and feeling really afraid. Like you wipe, there's something about wiping a booger on the the column of the monastery post becomes the causes for being reborn in hell, or something like that. So yeah, I think that it's good to bring that up, and also to sort of think about it in its context, that this is also instruction for like monks in the monastery, and possibly with a little bit of an objective to instill a little bit of fear, right? But the way that I relate with, especially teachings on the hell realms and so forth, I mean, I don't think that karma, cause, and effect is so out of proportion as some of those things might have us believe. But when you think about the really horrific things that people do to each other in the world, right? Like really horrific, terrible, violent, gruesome things, then it would make sense that there would be some sort of karmic ripening like the hell realm that would accord with the cause. But I think it's really important to stay clear about the cause being proportionate to the result. And then there is this idea of multiple, like amplification of karma through various, causes and conditions. But, and we don't know, I guess ultimately we don't know, right? But I think it's also important not to fall into kind of like a place of fear or extreme guilt, and to instead sort of relate to what you can relate to, and then just put what you can't relate to the side, right? In any case, also, I mean, one thing that Khenpo Rinpoche also brought up that for me was really kind of effective and powerful was just this reminder of the necessity of suffering, that not just the acknowledgement of the truth of suffering, but that to really follow the path that leads to liberation, that this actually necessitates and requires suffering, confronting suffering and enduring suffering. And the reason for that, that's kind of what this whole section is based on, because the purpose of it is to engender a sense of renunciation. So that renunciation is what motivates us to practice the Dharma, and for the right reasons, right? To seek liberation and to benefit beings who are suffering, just like we're suffering. But to be able to really benefit beings, we have to recognize and experience suffering ourselves. And then we have the capacity to hold and feel and really consider the suffering of others. So, I think that since Khenpo's teachings, I've been reflecting on how every time suffering arises, whether it's like a small suffering like boredom or agitation, or a kind of deeper suffering, there's a resistance, right? Like a feeling like something's wrong. I have to fix it. What's wrong? I have to fix it. push it away. That's just our automatic response. And so this reflection invites us to relate differently to suffering, to actually lean into it, to embrace, like to allow ourselves to accept and feel the suffering and acknowledge, yeah, as long as we continue chasing after happiness, as long as we continue to look for gratification in the external world, and since the pleasurable qualities of the senses or the 8 worldly concerns, then we're going to end up unsatisfied. And so it's such an important thing to feel that experientially and lean into it, because every time we have a glimmer of suffering, we have the opportunity to do that. We have the opportunity to bring that into our resolve, to seek liberation, right? But if we don't, if we just push it away, if we resist it, and if we think something's wrong, then we don't have that, we're not using those moments really. And they're like opportunities. They're really beautiful opportunities, really. There was actually one thing that it makes me think of. I mean, this is kind of extreme. And also Kimbola, what he was speaking to was also a little bit, kind of extreme, talking about what a lot of the yogis in Tibet, what they seek out, in terms of harsh conditions and long years of retreat and caves and so forth. So there is this Western woman, maybe some of you have heard of her. Her name is Tara. She's from, she goes by Ani Tara. She's from Austria. And she spent many years in Lapchi, like 30 years meditating in Lapchi, and like the highest cave called Sepuk, which is like a very, but there was one time her friend, who's also Austrian and a long time Dharma practitioner, she was telling me how Tara, when she was in Lapchi, chose to meditate in like this really rough, tiny little crack kind of in the cliff face that had like all this moisture coming in. And she thought, and she said, why do you do that? You can go to this other place. There's this, there are all these nice places where you can meditate, these nice retreat cabins. Why do you choose something so extreme? And she said, Tara turned to her and looked at her like with just this really piercing gaze and said, because then you really want liberation. So it's this sort of, kind of what Kimbo was speaking to, that we actually, there's some aspect of seeking this out, right? Seeking out hardship and suffering to generate a sense of dissatisfaction with samsara, with cyclic existence. And there's the word for renunciation in Tibetan. One thing that's interesting to just think about is ngejung, which we say renunciation, but when we say renunciation in English, we think of it, I think, as something like we're depriving ourselves, of, it's kind of a, that's kind of the word that comes to mind when I think of renunciation. But ngejung in Tibetan, there are all these different translations for it in the dictionary, but nge is definite or certain, and jung is emergent. So a literal translation of that word is definite or definite emergence. And so it kind of points to that once you have ngejung, it's like there's certainty that you are going in the direction of awakening, rather than focusing on the like depriving and pushing away kind of part of renunciation. There's a going towards liberation. There's a going towards awakening. There's also, it can be translated as certainty of release, or leaning home was one translation, which I thought was really interesting. And authentic becoming is another translation. So yeah, I just thought I would share some of those alternative translations. So maybe we can then spend like 5 minutes reflecting, and you can just allow yourself to rest and just drop in a question. You don't have to like try to find something, but just drop in the question and see if anything arises for you in terms of, since we've been starting these reflections on the 4 thoughts that turn the mind, if there's anything that has changed for you specifically in your relationship to suffering. If there's anything that arises, and then we can have some sharing and discussion. Nathan, would you mind keeping the bell for 5 minutes? So,
Okay.
yeah. there anything that comes up for anyone that you would like to share?
Can you hear me?
Hi, Yvonne. Yes, we can hear you.
Good morning. Man, this week I've been thinking so much about it, and not consciously, but maybe the message went deeper down. And I found this TV series in Prime yesterday. It's called Life After Life, that I seriously recommend that everybody watches it. And it is so amazing when we see something like that, because it helps understand really, really, the choice that we face when we are in a human life, that we cannot prevent suffering in any way, the suffering of health issues, work, that any changes, right? And how, the character in this movie, they present very alternate lives, and at the end, I'm not gonna spoil it for you guys, but at the end, it gives you the message that the only path is renunciation, you know. And when you're talking about all this pervasive surgery and how I think about it, when I wake up in the morning and I realize that even when I am supposed to be at my deepest relaxation state, I still have this underlying stress in my stomach, uneasiness, that I'm stressed and worried that something is going to happen. Because I've been living in alert mode for so many years, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult to not be afraid that something is going to change for the worse, because the body's decaying, the world is, violent out there, and we cannot change any of that. The only way that we can change, the only thing that we can change is our reaction to it. And even though we know the Dharma intellectually, bringing it inside and really implementing the concepts to our own body and mind is very challenging. It's very challenging. And I believe that suffering in a cave is something very tangible, but the underlying, fear of change, the all pervasive change is more subtle, but it's always there. And that's why we get sick. That's why we get sick in our stomach. That's why everybody is hoarding from our intestine out of stress. And until we realize that we cannot control anything, we're not going to be able to heal our bodies and ourselves. That we really need to focus on improving our practice and let it go, that fear, because we're all going to die anyway. And unless we make a good use of this human life to renunciation, it's going to be another life. I'm sorry, maybe it took so long, but I really encourage you guys to see this movie, because it really helped me understand what I've been, meditating or reflectioning on my own.
That in there about bringing the Dharma in, like, there's this example of, you mentioned the example of meditating in the cave, but that's really, like, for us, that's the example. I think that what renunciation is really pointing to is that exactly what's in the title, right? Of the 4 thoughts that turn the mind, turning the mind away from seeking like safety. You're speaking to like safety, a big part of trying to find comfort and safety and certainty in the outside world. But as long as we seek that externally, or we wait for those conditions to appear externally, it's impossible. So
it's
the only way
to
yes, turn inward and to precisely apply the instructions and tame the mind.
It's impossible. It's like we're chasing an always moving target. and it's never gonna happen. So when you turn the mind inside, that's when I realized that my intestine, my stomach is always constrained.
Mm. And it's good to acknowledge that sometimes, right? I mean, we all feel that to some degree, I think, or just to be really sensitive to acknowledging how we're holding suffering. Is there anyone else who would like to?
Yeah, I have something.
Yeah, thanks.
During the meditation, something came up for me, and that was sometimes we get caught up in kind of like what Yvonne was saying, we get caught up in the worldly, the process of worldly, and maybe like, for example, like getting money. And maybe our intention in the beginning was we're going to help all sentient beings. So we need to get more money so we can donate more. And then it becomes about getting the money and we lose the intention that was behind that. And then we end up hurting. We end up suffering because now we're thinking, I got to get 1,000 more. And then I get another 1,000 more. And then we're hurting people trying to get those thousands, and we're losing ourselves, and we're hurting ourselves and others. And sometimes I feel like when we get caught up in these worldly concerns, we lose our spirituality or our connection to the Dharma, and we cause more suffering. We cause more anxiety because it wasn't really necessary to be focused on trying to get that money or whatever that concern was, spending 1,000 hours on, volunteering to do something when now you're focused on the volunteering and you're losing your spiritual self. And sometimes we just need to take a break and recenter ourselves and refocus on what our intention is. Is our intention still pure? Or is our intention still focused on what we need to? Or have we lost and started thinking of something else?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Beverly. Actually, you touched on what I came up with when I was contemplating, which is one thing that I've been noticing is because trying to notice when just to lean into the suffering when it arises. And then what always becomes apparent is that it's one of the 8 worldly concerns that is causing me to suffer. So I think that, and you touched on, you were just speaking to one of the big ones, which is gain, because you were talking about like making money I'd like to just open up to people can anyone does anyone know off the top of their head, or would you like, or some of the 8 worldly concerns, what they are? Would anyone like to share? Come on, I know you know.
Loss and gain.
Yep, gain and loss.
Pleasure.
Praise and criticism. Thank you, Sharon.
Yeah, pleasure and pain.
Pleasure and pain. And really similar to praise and blame. Similar.
Reputation and
disrepute. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, fame. So that's reputation. I think it can be translated as fame. Sometimes they say fame and defamation, or reputation and disrepute. And so, obviously very similar to praise and blame. But this is really at the heart of renunciation, right? And that whole, like, when we're seeking gratification in the world, if we really look at what's going on, when we're feeling some pain, when we're feeling some sadness, or, not always, it might be, but so often it's because there's some grasping or expectation to kind of make everything in the external world fall on the side of the positive of those 8 worldly concerns, right?
I think I had the most trouble with pain.
And I mean, that kind of brings up the question of
Physical
what,
pain.
what endeavor we are in here, because we are practicing the middle way. We are not hanging hooks on our body and creating extreme physical pain to ourselves, such as a lot of ascetics have done. And then, so that brings up the whole question, I guess, of physical pain, because I was thinking of your friend on the cliff, and you know, in the crack in the cliff, and would that be the best method necessarily? Because I mean, it seems to me that a yogi in a hut with a good supply of hot tea and an equanimous mind that can sustain a very, very long meditation
Definitely.
might have a better chance to attain enlightenment and attain it more quickly than the person hanging off the cliff. I mean, I think that's just my reflection on this. So
Yeah, thank you. That's really, really good to bring up. Thank you, Steve. I think you know, it just people are so different, and different methods are effective for different people. And who knows, you know, that method may be counterproductive for some people, but it might be just what some people who really maybe are not, you know, that it's what I got from that story is that she was really wanting to get, you know, she was focusing on building this desire for liberation, and that was a method she employed, right? But it may not be necessary for someone else, or it may be counterproductive. But definitely, I think there's no one way.
yeah, I'm just reflecting on my own physical pain, because when I've been in a fairly extreme physical pain, I really can't do anything other than dwell on lowering the level of pain. You know, it's I guess if I were a different person, but it would require me. I mean, I'm not sure that that would lead by encouraging the continuation of the pain, how it could ever lead to enlightenment. I'm not sure. I really have some doubts about that.
About
Whether-
physical pain.
Well, whether I would be,
capable.
and I mean, as you say, everyone is different.
Yeah.
But I think most of us in a common era, of course, I mean, our average level of pleasure is probably 100 times higher than our forefathers 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, now if our electricity goes off or our cell phone dies, we're in, you know, we're in extreme pain just by virtue of that. I mean, that's psychic pain, so that's not quite the same, but it's just an example, I guess, of where we're at as a society, as in the evolution of human life in general.
Yeah, that's really true. And I think that when it comes to like physical pain, especially, you know, if you're saddled with it, right? Why not? If you can't overcome it, of course you want to overcome it if you can. If there's medicine, maybe take the medicine. In fact, you know, I know some people choose not to, you know, they'll be like, I'm going to just sit with the pain and work with this. But I mean, personally, I think, oh, there's like some Advil for a debilitating headache. And this is an emanation of, you know, the medicine Buddha's blessings. I'll take the Advil and dispel the pain, right? But you know, sometimes we can't escape the pain. So then if we can't escape the pain, then there may be ways to bring that pain onto the path, to transform it, or to, even if it is, I mean, I think of two methods in particular that are very powerful with pain. One is obviously renunciation, really using it to reflect on the suffering of samsara. And the second is compassion, because when we have debilitating pain, we can feel the pain of the world. We can use that pain to identify with the pain of others. And then through our own experience of pain, we can say, may all sentient beings who are feeling this incredible suffering be liberated from the suffering. May my pain take the place of the suffering of all beings. So that's skillful method. I mean, that's all we're doing, right? With it on the path is really employing all of these incredible methods that we have available to us.
Hello?
Hi,
Yes, in regard to physical pain, it's not to say it does not exist, or that suffering does not exist. You definitely need to take care of yourself and pay attention to things like be proactive in your own healthcare, especially in terms of what you consume, and that includes everything around you. I have found personally, I'm not saying this is right for everyone, but I've endured a lot of suffering, or what I would call suffering in terms of physical pain. But the more I think about it, when I'm in that state, I ask myself, is this really suffering? What comes to my mind is, no, this is the natural state of my body at this time. Not really what I would equate with suffering, even though it may hurt very bad, or and just the thought process of, no, this is the natural state of my body at the time, versus suffering, things start to feel better. Wow. And they feel better, and I don't know what else to say except I'm trying to think of the thought. I just did get out of the hospital, actually. So the realization also that if you're in a state of pain, physical pain, one of three things is going to happen. It's going to get better, it's going to get worse, or it's going to stay the same. When you come to accept that, I think it makes it a little less suffering, little bit less painful. And when you know too that there is a remedy for these sufferings, like you said, take an Advil or a Motrin, or not take it, and use skillful means and skillful methods, like say, okay, this I'm suffering, but acknowledge the suffering of others in this world, and that what they are going through could actually be much worse than what I'm experiencing myself, and send compassion to all the beings that are suffering with these types of physical pain helps. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing that. What you were first speaking about just brought into my mind, some of you might be familiar with one sutra that is actually like one of my favorites, and I'm familiar with it from the Pali Canon. It's called the Sutra of the Two Darts. So what it sounded like you were talking about, so it's the Buddha going through, what is the difference between like a worldly being or a spiritually immature being and somebody who is, like maybe on the stages of awakening. And the difference is, both feel like physical pain, the suffering of a single dart, the physical pain. But the difference is that on top of the experience of suffering itself, there's a second dart, a second arrow, which is the lamentation, the despair about the suffering that's magnifying the suffering, right? So that sounded so much what you were like, to me, Lisa, what you were describing of, this is just, you said something like the nature of my experience right now. Mhm.
The nature of my being at the time is it really suffering? And the more I think that thought, maybe it's not good to think thoughts, but the more I think that, is this really suffering? Or is it just the natural state of my body right now? The more it actually relieves the suffering.
There's not the added mental suffering around it, it sounds like. Yeah.
Yes, and I had never heard that sutra you mentioned before.
I'll send it to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Virginia. Thank you, Sangha.
I have something on the physical pain. I was following another monk out of Augsburg, Germany, a Shaolin monk, and they were talking about pain. And sometimes what we do, some of our behaviors kind of like make us suffer more in pain, like taking pain medicines when we really don't need it. It reduces our body's capability of naturally being able to tolerate the pain. So what some of the Shaolin monks do is they exercise, and like they do an exercise where they put their body to tolerate a certain amount of pain, and then they get used to it, and then they put their body into a tolerating a little bit more. So then they can tolerate a lot more pain than the average person because they've exercised in it.
Yeah, that's
In the same way, when we take Motrin or Tylenol or some of those pain medicines, what we're doing to our body inside is we're lowering our ability to be able to handle that pain. So we're causing our own suffering.
that's interesting.
So, and the reason I know this because I am allergic to a lot of the pain medicines. So I have a higher pain tolerance than most people because I can't take pain meds because I'm allergic to them. So I've had to learn how to deal with pain without them. I can take anti-inflammatories, but I can't take pain meds. But one of the things that I realized was that's not really a bad thing, because then now my body is naturally fighting off the pain. I don't have those same pain receptors. Like if I have a migraine, I don't feel the pain. I have the symptoms of the migraine, but I don't actually have the pain in the head. And it happens. It's rare, but it happens. So I'll get the migraines or the dizziness and the nausea, but I won't have the pain associated with the migraine. I just know I have a migraine because I'm getting dizzy or nauseous. So, but we create our own pain sometimes by trying to get that easy fix of getting our pain under control. And then we're actually making it harder for us.
Because there's so much aversion to the pain.
Right.
Yeah. Erin, please.
So I recently went out for the second time to Wat Metta, which is a Theravadan monastery in California. And I had seen this chant that we did before, but chanting it together in the evening was more impactful. And I'll just read the English translation. It's called the 4 Dhamma summaries. It's a little bit more.
The 4 what?
Dhamma.
Dhamma.
Yeah.
Dharma, which is the Pali for Dharma.
Correct.
Yeah.
The world is swept away. It does not endure. The world offers no shelter. There is no one in charge. The world has nothing of its own. One has to pass on, leaving everything behind. The world is insufficient, insatiable, a slave to craving. And the one that really struck me was this Pali word, anabhisaro, which ana is a prefix that means no or none, and bisaro means protector or leader.
No protection.
No protector, nobody. And the O is the nominative, like the protector, the leader. There's no one in charge of everything. And I felt very struck by that, because I think, for me anyway, within the Western setting, there is always kind of this hope that there is somebody in charge, that there's a cosmic manager that I can go to. And Yeah, and kind of be a Karen about my complaints about the universe. And when I read that, it really struck me with a lot of terror because I felt like somebody was being very honest. You know, the Dhamma, it was just so direct. It's like, there is no one in charge. There's nobody overseeing all of this. There's nobody that's going to come and tell you what you need to do. Of course, we have the Dharma, it's been laid out. But yeah, there isn't a being, there isn't a person, there isn't a protector that's going to solve any of this. And I think in terms of suffering, you know, within our own cultural milieu, we're kind of like, oh, somebody is going to come and fix this. We're going to have somebody to get us out of this. And even just kind of sitting in the background of my mind, I kind of realized like how deeply rooted that impulse was. And so, yeah, that kind of fear being tied up, you know, with suffering of like this sort of existential kind of feeling of like, wow, there really isn't anybody in charge of this. There isn't anybody that's protecting everybody. It's, yeah.
Thank you, Erin. It kind of goes a little bit back to what Yvonne was speaking to, that feeling a little bit, I think, in the beginning.
Yeah. And if you pay attention from what everybody has communicated, everybody's speaking about different type of pains. You know, we have the text that talks about different pains. So somebody was talking about a birth pain, you know, somebody else was talking about, I was talking more about all pervasive pain. So everybody has a connection or a recollection of a different type of pain. Like Steve, I think is one saying, everybody's different. And that's our karma. That's what I realized, you know, that's where we are. That's why we are where we are. That's our karma. We are so fortunate that we're not starving like a hungry ghost. In whatever we are, it's like Pema Chodro said, start where you are. And everybody's got its own challenges. And I think that goes back to being compassionate, like you said, you know. It's very
And then also, sorry.
No, if you can talk more about it.
Well, no, just you say, oh, we're so fortunate we're not suffering like a hungry ghost. And yet we have suffered that way probably, you know, I mean, according to the teachings, count many, 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 many times over in our countless lifetimes in cyclic existence, and possibly will suffer like that again. And so again, that imperative in really reflecting on how immense the suffering is, feeling our own experience of suffering, and then reflecting on the suffering of samsara in general becomes this imperative to, and to Erin's point, there's no one who's going to come in and take care of things for us. We're our own protector. The Buddha is our protector. The three jewels are our protector, but we really have to do the work ourselves.
And that's where our challenge lies, because we're privileged, because our suffering is maybe less hard than in previous times, but is
exactly.
And I guess the point I'm trying to make is the karma brought us to this point that we're so fortunate to listen to this, but it is now up to each and every one of us to use it to deal with our own sort of pain. But the fact that we acknowledge it, it's a first step.
Thank you, Yvonne. So one thing we didn't do actually is read through, perhaps we could read through just the first section here of the 3 types of suffering that characterize samsara. So would somebody like to volunteer to read that, the first 3, you know, the 3 here and then the 3 paragraphs?
Yeah,
Okay, Nathan will do it. Thank you.
okay, the 3 types of suffering that characterize samsara. 1, the all-pervasive suffering of conditioned existence. 2, the suffering of change. And 3, overt suffering. In general, it is important to understand what is meant in this context when we speak of suffering. It is not as though everything is pure misery, devoid of all happiness and joy, nor are we trying to see it that way. Rather, we're acknowledging a fundamental truth about existence that, when properly understood, becomes the foundation for genuine happiness and freedom. It's like, for example, someone who is diagnosed with a dangerous illness, such as cancer, and then discovers that there is a very promising, highly effective cure for it, which brings a tremendous sense of hope and relief. In the same way, knowing that samsara is the nature of suffering, but also understanding the path and practices that lead to liberation from this cycle gives us profound cause for joy. Sometimes there is a misunderstanding that develops based on what we think characterizes the word suffering in English. The term in Tibetan is duknyal, or dukkha in Sanskrit. The meaning of the English word suffering is included in dukkha, but it also implies much more than that. It refers to everything from the very coarse forms of misery and suffering all the way to very subtle, virtually imperceptible levels of suffering. It speaks to the unsatisfying nature of sensory experience as a whole, as well as the underlying strain of discomfort and of embodied existence.
Thank you. No, let's just pause and see if there's anything that anybody would like to share kind of in consideration of that first section. Any thoughts or? So sometimes I'll just add that, this word dukkha or dungal. So there's they're different. Drupon Rinpoche is really unsatisfied with the translation of suffering. He has said, let's use a different word besides suffering. But then it's also, we went through the different kind of options. Sometimes they say unsatisfactoriness, like in some of the more kind of Theravadan circles. I don't know, is there another term maybe, Erin, that you know of, or? Stress. That's really interesting. Dissatisfaction, stress. So also, just so people know, Erin is actually studying Pali, so she really knows what she's talking about.
So the opposite of dukkha is sukha, which is happiness. So that's the two different prefix, but it kind of comes from this old term of literally almost like getting an axle out of the joint.
An axle out of a joint.
Yeah, out of the joint of a wheel. So a lot of these really old terms actually kind of go back almost to like agricultural words and metaphors and like very like hands-on kind of thing. So that's sort of the idea that it's like the feeling you get of disappointment when you have like a flat tire, that kind of very mundane origin of it. And so it is a huge, just like the word sukha is seen as happiness or bliss or joy, it can have a very expansive meaning. Yeah. And they're not always necessarily in opposition to each other, but
that's the way I think of it, is like the word dungal or dukkha is a really broad term, and suffering falls into that, like what we think of as suffering falls under that category, together with more subtle types of suffering like unsatisfactoriness and so forth.
Yeah. So it's pain is part of that, but it's really like just that sort of sense of things being undone or things being out of shape, not quite right. Things like a speck in your eye, like a sort of subtleness of like things are not as they could be.
Like an underlying agitation.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you.
So this question is somewhat goes into the next section, but I'll just, in reflection of my life, I realized that for most of my youth, from maybe starting at age 12 or 14 until my 30s, late 30s maybe, I suffered rather tremendously from what I would call existential angst, right? I don't know if any of you are familiar with that term, but it's a self-imposed suffering based upon a deep unhappiness of existing, and takes place maybe when you have all the comforts, basic comforts, home, food, physical comfort,
And
not
it
in
still
physical,
doesn't quite do it, does
not
it?
in physical pain, huh?
And it still doesn't quite do it, does
No.
it?
You carry it around, and for no reason, really. But you can't seem to pull yourself out of it. But so I think because there's a term for that, and I wrote at one time quite a bit about existential philosophy, and it's very much attached to a whole philosophy that came from Europe about life in general. And so I guess I'm asking the question now is because I keep reading articles about the pervasiveness of depression
Mhm.
in our society. And I'm wondering how many cases of that are related to what I used to call existential angst. And all I can say about it is that Buddhism was my path out of it.
That's beautiful.
Okay, so, and I wish I could say it more specifically. Exactly how, but it had to do partly with not dwelling on myself.
It's big.
Because I think self-indulgence, immersion
Preoccupation.
is very, very harmful, actually, in that context.
Absolutely.
And if you can start thinking about others, about the world outside yourself, those are the pathways out, I think.
Definitely. Thank you.
Follow up with that. I had military sexual trauma, and I isolated a whole lot. Like I wouldn't go outside unless I had my service dog with me. And I tried to get involved in therapy and everything like that. But when I was doing the therapy, most of the principles came back to Buddhism, right? They do it in a nice structured way where it's easy to understand, 7th grade level. I think that's how they write their books for psychology, right? But the foundation is Buddhism. So I decided, because I was doing like a DBT class, and the lady was, yeah, this goes back down to Buddhism. They believe this. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to check it out. And then I had a dream that specifically led me to Tibetan Buddhism. So I started coming, and then I started volunteering, and that got me out of the house. So because I was really, really depressed, right? I didn't want to leave my house. You couldn't get me to leave my house unless somebody went with me. I wouldn't go to the store. Like that's how bad it was. So then I learned some meditation techniques here. I think I started coming with Virginia and John to the meditation class. And then I came during the weeks, when they were still over on the other side. And it really, really helped So with my PTSD and depression. So I've been telling some of the other vets, like, there's another combat vet here that I talked to. Yeah. And we had this huge discussion about like how Buddhism has helped with PTSD, like, because with military sexual trauma and combat PTSD, kind of similar, but they're different. Military sexual trauma is a little bit more trust-based, like this is a trauma that's incurred by somebody that you trust. Whereas combat, you don't know that person, right? So maybe there's a little difference there. But we talked about how great Buddhism was for PTSD and military sexual trauma. And I wish that I had known this when I was in Pittsburgh, because we used to do a lot of panels, like suicide prevention panels and military sexual trauma panels at universities and stuff. I could have added this to some of those panel discussions, because this is really a great method. I like how psychology uses it and breaks it down into little sessions, like, exercises for you to do. Like they'll take a lesson and then they'll have everyone stop and try an exercise. Like you're in the here and now. Here's a stone. Now describe it without using opinions. It's smooth, it's hard. And then it keeps you grounded, right? That small little exercise keeps you grounded. So for me, the Buddhism has been a lifesaver. I'm actually more social now than I used to be. I do have my tendencies to want to isolate and stay away from people, because I feel like I've done it for so long. It's kind of natural. And it is a little bit outside my comfort zone to interact with people and take on their problems and listening to all their, I'm not used to that. So I get a little frustrated and maybe a little lash out a little bit, but it's great. It's great. Like you said, if it wasn't for Buddhism, I don't think psychology would be here, because they said it was Sigmund Freud, but it wasn't, because it was around longer than Sigmund Freud.
Thanks, Beverly. So we have about 11:20. So I know we'll also do the recitation of the Heart Sutra. But perhaps we can go through, can just read this second section here, the all-pervasive suffering of conditioned existence, if someone would like to read that, and then we'll close after. Yeah. Yeah, you want to read it? Okay, thanks, Erin. Yeah.
2.1.
2.1.
The all-pervasive suffering of conditioned existence. In The Ornament of Precious Liberation, it says, the suffering of conditioned existence has a neutral feeling. The suffering of change has a feeling of pleasure about it, and overt suffering actually feels like suffering. The moment we are born, we are bound to the aggregates, which in themselves are the nature of suffering. Even if we temporarily experience happiness and pleasure, there is the underlying current of potentiality, or rather the inevitability of change. This generates a very subtle level of anxiety and stress. It is said that this type of all-pervasive suffering is so subtle that it is not even perceived by ordinary beings. It is very acutely seen and experienced, however, by noble beings. The example that is often given is that for ordinary beings, this type of suffering is like a hair resting in the palm of one's hand, but for noble beings, it is like a hair caught in the eye. Essentially, this type of suffering contains every aspect of conditioned existence and is what most fundamentally characterizes the unsatisfactory nature of even the most pleasant of experiences to be found in samsara.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is, it's like almost like we have, I think, even though it says, and they really say, that to perceive this very, very subtle level of suffering, it's a very kind of high level of realization. So ordinary beings like ourselves really can't perceive it. And yet there is, I mean, what we've been speaking to is some sense of this, right? The underlying kind of unsatisfactoriness, the underlying stress, the dissatisfaction, no matter kind of how much pleasure we might be experiencing, there's no real gratification there. So there's obviously some level that we can relate to and that we can feel and we can understand. And it's also inspiring to think that there's a level that hasn't been made accessible to us yet. We haven't become sensitized to, because we still have these pretty thick layers of obscuration. So when I think about, like, when I imagine what it must be like, I think it must be that somebody at a very kind of clear level of seeing just sees so clearly, more clearly, this sort of web of interdependence and the unfolding of karma and sort of the inevitable suffering that is just that process itself, that, you know, I mean, it's so visceral, this idea of it being so keen to somebody who really is at that level of seeing, that it's like an eyelash in their eye, you know, that it's that vivid, you know, that really perceptible. Maiden, you've been, and so silent, do you want to share anything?
I don't know. Not especially though. The other week ago or so, John had a handout during his meditation, and it dawned on me that happiness and suffering are basically just a duality. And so you really can't lay any kind of like you can't take either of them, happiness or suffering, as you know, I don't know what the word is. I'm escaping. What's that?
Independently?
Well, you can't take them as like this. They're less than you would assume. You can't say, "Oh, I'm suffering," and like have it get the best of you. You can't say, "Oh, I'm happy," and let that get the best of you either. Because they're both like opposite sides of the same coin. You know, which one do you want? Of course, when you flip it, you know, of course you want it happiness. But that's only part of it. That's only part of the thing. That's only half of the situation.
Thank you. Yeah. So any other reflections on this section, or should we move to reading the next one? The subtle suffering of conditioned existence. Okay, let's move to 2.2, the suffering of change. If anyone would like to read? Would someone on Zoom like to read this section?
I'll go ahead. The suffering of change. The suffering of change is easy to understand. Whatever sources of pleasure, happiness, and joy we find in samsara, they are always inevitably at some point subject to change. We wander in samsara due to the afflictive emotions, the mind of craving and aversion. Whenever or wherever we're born, craving and aversion are there with us. For this reason, we crave the things that bring us happiness and pleasure and cling to them with attachment. When things change, as they inevitably do, we feel suffering and aversion. For example, things may be going well for us for a while. Perhaps we're healthy, we're successful in our business, we're popular and liked by many people. We're doing well financially, but such situations are never permanent. Things are constantly changing year to year, month to month, week to week, day to day, hour to hour, and even moment to moment. There is no way to hang on to anything. We may, for example, feel physically well and mentally at peace in the morning. Perhaps we're relaxed and at ease. Our mind is inclined to virtue and we feel aligned with the Dharma. Then, after a few hours, our mood completely changes. Perhaps something makes us angry, or we give rise to jealousy or irritation, and suddenly our peace of mind is completely lost. In this way, our experience is changing at all times. As long as we have this body, the potential for afflictive emotions is always lurking. We have to be very conscious to remain in alignment with Dharma and to practice virtue. We have to constantly be on watch and correct course. As we know, everything that we experience is a product of the karma we have accumulated, all the good and all the bad. We have a mix of karma. Sometimes favorable karma ripens, and then it changes into the ripening of unfavorable karma. We can see it for what it is, and this will help us to feel less distress. As long as we are embodied in samsara, we are at the mercy of the waves of our ever unfolding karma. The body and the mind wander together. In the Gongchik, Lord Jigten Sumgun says, it is the body that wanders in the ocean of samsara. Most commonly, it is the thought that it is the mind which wanders in samsara, not the body, since the body is cast off at death and the mind continues on. However, Lord Jigten Sumgun makes the point that in order for the consciousness to wander in samsara, it has to assume a body, and that body manifests from lifetime to lifetime according to karma.
Thank you, Lisa. So for those of you, some of you might be familiar, there's this really important text in our lineage called the Gongchik, which is like the single, sometimes translated as the single intention, the single intent. And it is kind of the, it's this book of statements, Vajra statements made by Lord Jigten Sumgun, which are studied in all different lineages, and they're kind of, you know, they're sort of they all kind of go to this very deep place of like the wisdom of the ultimate truth. And they're a little bit different from sometimes what is like commonly thought, you know, or stated in the context of Dharma, like in other traditions or whatnot. And it's really amazing. So all of these different statements, and this one, which is that the body wanders in the ocean of samsara. When we hear it, we're like, what? How does that make sense, right? And then you think about it, if you think about it, and then really like what he's saying is so profound, because it's karma that perpetuates samsara. And without karma, we don't have a body. You know, the body is made up of karma. It's a product of karma. So going from lifetime to lifetime, it's the body we take every time we are born, we take a body. But anyway, I think what is being touched upon in general in this whole section is, I mean, the way I kind of relate to it is we make this mistake of taking everything so personally. But when, you know, everything that happens to us, everything that we experience, and when we really can kind of step back and say, this is all just karmic display and nothing else. There's no point in getting involved or wrapped up in it or taking it personally. And then we can have a different perspective. When we can step back like that, then we're no longer reactive. we can actually choose to react in a way that is in line with Dharma and therefore create positive causes, right? Which is not easy. I mean, easier said than done. We always get caught all the time, right? Okay, so maybe we can just read the section of overt suffering, and then following that, we can close with the Heart Sutra. Would anyone like to read the section on overt suffering?
I would like to do it.
Thank you.
From the moment of birth, we inevitably face overt suffering at multiple points through our lives. The suffering that characterizes the human condition, birth, old age, sickness, and death, falls into the category of over-suffering. These experiences rarely occur in isolation. Rather, they're cascade and compound. Consider how aging brings not only diminishing vision, but also intensifying arthritic pain, or how someone might simultaneously require gallbladder surgery while dealing with debilitating knee problems. Overt suffering encompasses a spectrum of physical, mental, and emotional hardships that frequently intertwine. Physical pain becomes amplified by our mental and emotional responses. When we lose someone dear to us, our natural grief intensifies through our resistance to accept the loss. During this illness, physical discomfort is layered with anxiety about recovering and fear of deterioration. Yet these fundamental experiences, illness, aging, and death, remain natural and unavoidable aspects of human experiences. When we approach these challenges with acceptance rather than resistance, we discover they become significantly more bearable. The suffering doesn't disappear, but our relationship to it transforms. Is that it? Is that the end?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. And for our Hispanic classmates, I think overt suffering is translated like dolor del dolor, Virginia.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't hear.
Yes, the translation for the Hispanic people, I think overt suffering is dolor del dolor.
Dolor de dolor. Yes, because actually, so I chose to use the translation overt suffering, but you may have seen in some of your other reading that often this category of suffering is translated as suffering of suffering.
Right.
So that is, and that's what it is in Tibetan, dungal gi dungal. So it's the suffering of suffering. But I think another way to translate it is overt suffering, which to me kind of speaks a little bit more to kind of the nature of what it is. Sometimes I've heard a lot of lamas describe this as being kind of what's spoken about in the first paragraph there, which is like you already have suffering, and then on top of that suffering is another cause of suffering, like you have cancer and then your mother dies, so it's like a compounded, sometimes it's translated as actually compounded suffering. And it's interesting, we talked about that sutra of the two darts. I think I have this sort of sense that goes back to actually it being related to the Buddha speaking about suffering layered on top of suffering, which he really speaks about as being like a mental suffering layered on top of like the actual suffering or the physical suffering. So that falls into it, but really what it is in this context is coarse suffering. It's just like what we identify as hardship and suffering, what's painful in life, or
But like you said, it's like suffering augmentation. It's like
the augmentation of suffering. Yeah.
Right. It's more like you're already in pain, but you compounded with the mental pain. You augmented it.
That's right. Yeah. Which kind of happens inevitably anytime there is a course level suffering, there's like a pile up. There tends to be this kind of compounded experience of pain.
we Hispanic people tend to believe that tragedies come in thirds.
I'm sorry?
We Hispanic people, I think we have the belief, I mean, at least in Mexico, that suffering, tragedies come in thirds, 3 at a time.
3 at a time. Wow. I wonder if there's something similar in the Tibetan, because of this idea of it being, that there is one bad thing happens and then another bad thing happens. I wonder if that's
It's a terrible belief, but it's a common belief.
Mhm.
I've actually heard that growing up myself. And recently I tried to encourage my elderly father to let's get away from that type of thinking, because it typically relates to someone dying. Oh, one person is dead, now 2 more that are going to die, but we're all going to die someday. So some of these things that can compound all of this, I think too, there's so much outside influence in the West. I don't know how it is in other countries, but here, if you're under the care of a doctor and you don't do exactly what they say and take exactly the medication they say you need to you need to have this medicine, even though you may have lived in your own body for a very long time and instinctively what's going on, and then you say, oh no, I don't want that medicine, then you become labeled as non-compliant, you become like a troublemaker, and it just adds, I think, to all of the suffering, because then I think it actually ends up affecting your treatment from a lot of these doctors. So I have a lot of interest in how this is done in other countries, because I've never been to another country. Do other countries take more of a homeopathic or natural approach, other than just say, you have to take this medicine, you're going to die, you don't take it. Well, so what? I'm going to die anyhow someday. I don't have a death wish, but like I said, I have a real fascination. Do they all think this way in other countries?
Yeah, healthcare systems are difficult. So let's read then the Heart Sutra. Actually, Beverly, would you mind? I didn't get I don't have a copy of it. Sorry.
Okay. So
Oh, I
as
guess I could have read it on this computer.
as Virginia gets her copy, but I think it'd probably be best to just go over it briefly prior to actually getting into the recitation. Let me see here. On page, I believe it's page 8. No. Page 9. No. Oh gosh, all this stuff is out of order.
Oh, maybe it must be 8. No.
Hey, Beverly,
Or
can you?
7. It's on 7.
Beverly, could you give me another copy? This is
Oh, out of
badly
order.
out of order. But it is, I believe, page 8 that we're going to. Thank you. Okay, so page 8, it says at the very top, form is emptiness, emptiness itself is form. Emptiness is no other than form, form is no other than emptiness. Well, you can do this particular way. But I was pointed out when this was originally given to me to recite, that these last 2 lines should be switched around. So in other words, form is emptiness, emptiness itself is form, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness is no other than form.
This just follows what it actually is in the Tibetan.
Yeah. So form, emptiness, instead of form, emptiness, emptiness, form.
So when Nathan leads us in this, he'll switch those two lines. So you may have noticed last time we kind of, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Right. And what we'll do, we get to the the end of page 17. And before you start on page 18, this is where you would recite the mantra. And what we'll do is we'll try to recite a round of the mala, but since time is a little bit short, we may only do half a mala maybe. But this is where, as I was instructed, this is where to do the mantra recitation itself. And then you go on to thus ends the Mahayana Sutra called, etc. And so after that, the part that starts on page 19, this was written by Nagarjuna and is a really good coda for this practice. You may find on page 21, there's this section that says, well, if you go back to page 20, briefly at the very end, it says, make all evil and other disagreeable elements turn back. May they be destroyed. May they be calmed. May they be totally calm. You clap there after destroyed, calmed, and totally calmed. And that's a customary thing. And it's basically just to stop. It's basically for the difficult elements to be turned back to fear, for them to be destroyed, for them to be calmed, for them to be totally calmed. And you clap like that in order to affect that precisely.
The delusion of samsara.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. For transcendent knowledge to dawn. Okay. So okay, so let's go. I hope that was good. You have a question about that, you can buttonhole me afterward. So to page 3, and we'll begin. Homage to the essence of transcendent knowledge, the Bhagavati. Thus have I heard. Once the Blessed One was dwelling in the royal domain of the Vulture Peak Mountain, together with a great gathering of monks and bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One entered the samadhi which examines the dharmas called profound illumination. And at the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, looking at the profound practice of transcendent knowledge, saw the 5 skandhas and their natural emptiness. Then through the inspiration of the Buddha, Venerable Sariputra said to noble Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva and Mahasattva, how should those noble men and women learn who wish to follow the profound practice of transcendent knowledge? Thus he spoke, and noble Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva and Mahasattva, answered the Venerable Sariputra with these words. Sariputra, those noble men and women who wish to follow the profound practice of transcendent knowledge should look at it like this. The 5 skandhas should be seen purely in their natural emptiness. Form is emptiness. Emptiness itself is form. Form is no other than emptiness. Emptiness is no other than form. In the same way, feeling, perception, concept, and consciousness are emptiness. Thus, Sariputra, all dharmas are emptiness and have no characteristics. They are unborn and unceasing. They are not impure or pure. They neither decrease nor increase. Therefore, Sariputra, since there is emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no perception, no concept, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. No appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no sensation, no dharmas. There is no quality of sight, and so on until no quality of thought, and no quality of mind consciousness. There is no ignorance and no wearing out of ignorance, and so on until no old age and death, nor their wearing out. In the same way, there is no suffering, no cause of suffering, no ending of suffering, and no path, no wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Sariputra, since there is no attainment for the bodhisattvas, they abide by means of transcendent knowledge. And since there is no obscurity of mind, they have no fear. They transcend falsity and pass beyond the bounds of sorrow. All the Buddhas who dwell in the past, present, and future, fully and clearly awaken to unsurpassed, true, complete enlightenment by means of transcendent knowledge. Therefore, the mantra of transcendent knowledge, the mantra of deep insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra which calms all suffering should be known as truth, for there is no deception. The mantra of transcendent knowledge is proclaimed, Tayata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasamgati Bodhi Soha. Sariputra, this is how a bodhisattva mahasattva should learn profound transcendent knowledge. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and praised the noble bodhisattva mahasattva of Avalokiteshvara, saying, well done, noble son. It is so. It is just so. Profound transcendent knowledge should be practiced just as you have taught, and all the Tathagatas will rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, the Venerable Sariputra and the noble Bodhisattva Mahasattva Avalokiteshvara, that whole gathering and the world with its gods, men, asuras, and Gandharvas, rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One. And so here, recite the mantra at your own pace. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Teyata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasam Gati Bodhi Soha. Beato Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasamgati Bodhi Soha. Thus ends the Mahayana Sutra called the Bhagavati, Essence of Transcendent Knowledge. Namo, homage to the Lama, homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha, homage to the Great Mother, Transcendent Knowledge. May all my true words be accomplished. Just as formerly Indra, Lord of the gods, contemplating the profound meaning of transcendent knowledge, recited these words, and by that turned back all evil and other disagreeable elements, may I too, by contemplating the profound meaning of transcendent knowledge and reciting the words, make all evil and other disagreeable elements turn back. May they be destroyed, may they be calmed, may they be totally calm. Whatever is interdependent, arising from connection, is without cessation and without birth, without end and without permanence, without coming and without going, without division and without unity of meaning. All conditions fully released, teaching release. I bow to the sacred words of the perfect Buddha. May there be good fortune.
Maybe can we do it once in Tibetan? This one, Namo Lama La Cha Salo Sanjay La Cha Salo, no? It's kind of nice anyway. Let's do it. George? Yeah. Nam Malacha, Salo Sanjay La Cha, Salo Chula Cha, Salo Gendin La Cha, Salo Yumchin Mo Sheragi Karo Tujimba La Cha, Salo Sere Gubar Gyoje Jidai Mo La Wambo Jidin Jimadab Giparo Zara Ji Zila Sabi Zila Dunu Jebala Dine Dude Jin La Sopa Mijin Becho Dam Jeshe Ba de Shendu Dagi Kyang Jum Jimo Sheragi Paro Tujimba Dun Sama Yela Sam. Huh? Dra Yomarve. Oh, it's a little bit different how he usually does it. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, it's really kind of cool sometimes when you do it in Tibetan, it has like some oomph. That's why I wanted to do it. But anyway, seems like we don't have enough. Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, so turn to page 24 in your prayer book. By the virtues collected in the three times, by myself and all beings in samsara and nirvana, and by the innate root of virtue, may I and all beings quickly attain unsurpassed, perfect, complete, precious enlightenment. May the teachings of the great Drupon Ratna Shri, who is omniscient, Lord of the Dharma, Master of interdependence, continue and increase through study, practice, contemplation, and meditation until the end of samsara. And then to page 19. Bodhicitta, the excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. Changchup Semcho Rinpoche Ma Ke Panan Ke Gyoche Ke Pa Nyam Pa Me Pa Gong Ne Gong Du Va Sho Changchu Sencho Rinpoche Ma Ke Panan Ke Gyoche Ke Pa Nyam Pa Me Pa Gong Ne Gong Du Va Sho.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and